Hi, welcome to another episode of Digging for Truth. I'm your host, Henry Smith. Today's episode we're going to be calling The Christmas Story. How well do you know it? Archaeologist Gary Byers joins us today to talk about the Christmas story found in the biblical text, modern-day nativity scenes, and how archaeological evidence assists us in better understanding the events surrounding the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Gary, welcome back to Digging for Truth, man.
Hey, buddy, nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. The last time you were here in the studio, and now
living in Maryland.
Yeah, you were in Maryland, and now you've gone all the way across the country to get away from me. Now you live in New Mexico.
Yes, well, I wasn't trying to get away from you, trying to get away from the snow, but we had 8 inches here on Monday, so I may be coming back.
That's great. Well, welcome to the show once again, Gary. We're glad to have you aboard. Now, today we're going to be talking about the Christmas story. How well do you know it? And let's just jump right into it. Let's get started. We're going to begin by talking about the birth narrative in Luke 2, and I'd like you to set the stage for the audience as we walk through this important biblical account.
Okay, well, most of us know Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7 actually talks about the birth story. Matthew refers to it in chapter 2, but Luke really tells the story, and it's the days of Caesar Augustus. There's a census across the Roman world. Everybody goes to their own town. Joseph goes from his town, where he's living in Nazareth, to his hometown in Judea, Bethlehem, and it's called the city or the town of David. And he goes there because he is of David's family line. And he goes there for the census with Mary, his espoused wife, a betrothed wife, and she is expecting a child. And of course, we know that was kind of a big part of the story, her expecting the child at this point. But while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. And he's born there. And she wraps him in cloth, lays him in a manger, and there's no room for them in the inn. That's how it's read in our English Bibles.
Yes, and that's often translated into our nativity scenes. But you and I are today going to be exploring that a little bit. We're going to warn the audience that we're going to be a little bit of a party pooper, but only because we want to be sure we're accurately representing the biblical account. So let's do that now, Gary. And if anybody writes to us upset about what we're going through here, I'm going to blame it on you, okay?
Yeah, have them contact me.
Okay, so let's talk about things. You know, the question you're asking is, where are these things mentioned in the text? And you go ahead and walk through some of these things that we commonly associate with the story that may not be there in the text.
Well, and it just as a brief introduction to it, I was a pastor for over 20 years, and every year you had to come up with a series of Christmas story messages. So every year I was always looking for new stuff. And one day I came across an article in Bible and Spade magazine. Ever heard of that? This goes way back, Henry. This is almost before you were born.
Oh, my goodness.
I think this issue came out in the 70s. And I read it, and it made me mad because it undid all the Christmas stories I told for all these years using the traditional perspective. But I was studying archaeology, and the more I thought about it, it took months, I realized, I think this guy's right. And so back in the 80s, I started to change the way I told the Christmas story. And in a nutshell, here it is. Where in the text of Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, and maybe we can even have it up on the screen. But in the text, it says, here's the question. Where in the text does it mention a barn? Or where are the barnyard animals mentioned? Or where is the innkeeper's quote given? In fact, in which verse is the innkeeper mentioned? And by the time I'm done today, I'm going to even try to tell you there's not even an inn like a hotel like we think of. How about that for a start?
Well, that's a good start. We're going to have some fun with this. Let's go back. So you've mentioned now some things that that don't appear to be in the text, that we've done some inferences. So the barn makes its way in, and of course, along with the barn comes the barnyard animals, because that's a natural association. And you've got the manger, which is in the text. So let's talk a little bit about what we actually see there. Let's go back to what you started with Luke 2 and just walk through what is in the text.
Okay, well, it starts off by Joseph being of the house and family of David and calling Bethlehem the city of David. Now, we know from the Old Testament, we call Jerusalem the city of David. But now in the New Testament, they're referring back to the old days, and twice in Luke chapter 2, verse 4 and 11, it mentions the city of David being Bethlehem. So Joseph's family lived in Bethlehem, is from Bethlehem, and Joseph is actually in the family line of King David to Jesus. So he is of the house and family of David. He is a big shot right in the line. In fact, if things had gone correctly, he would be the king of Israel because he was qualified because of his family history to be the king. So we're at the city of David. Joseph's going back to his ancestral home in Bethlehem. So we have that. Then we have the manger, not a barn, but a manger. And that's, of course, where you feed the animals. A manger is a feeding trough. And then we have the word in the English Bible. And the Greek word is kataluma. And that has a particular meaning. In fact, it's a very different word than the one Luke used in chapter 10 when he talked about the Good Samaritan and the inn. Totally different word. Luke knew what a real inn, hotel was. So kataluma didn't mean a hotel. It meant something else.
So in verse 7 in the birth narrative here, it says there was no room for them in the inn, and you're saying that word is the Greek kataluma, and yep. that Luke uses a different word for in the Samaritan story in Luke chapter 10. So this may be a mistranslation, is what I hear you saying. You got about 30 seconds.
Yes, it is. In fact, the NIV in 2011 changed their translation to match the only other time in the New Testament where kataluma is used. In Luke 22:11, the upper room, the guest room, the upper guest room of the house is the word kataluma. That's what Luke was talking about in chapter 22. I think for sure it's what he meant in chapter 2.
Oh, very good. Well, this is a great lesson for us in terms of the care of translation. Translation's important. And so this is a good little lesson. We're going to talk more about the kataluma in our next segment. So friends, thank you for joining us today with Gary Byers, who's an archaeologist with the ABR staff. And we're talking about the Christmas story. How well do you know it? We'll be right back after this message.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures. For students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible, please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm your co-host Henry Smith, and I'm here with archaeologist Gary Byers, our friend and ABR staff member. We're talking about the Christmas story. How well do you know it? Well, Gary, in our last segment, we left off talking about the upper room, the kataluma, which we think has been mistranslated as in the birth narrative. Let's explore that a little bit more for the audience, and also talk about the manger part of it. So go ahead with that, please.
Okay, yeah. Well, in Luke 22, verse 11, Jesus says to the guys who's preparing the Passover for that night, say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, where is the guest room? It's the word kataluma, same word as in Luke 2:7. Where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, second or third floor, all furnished. And there you're supposed to make your preparations. So the Cataluma on the last night of Jesus' life was an upstairs guest room of a house in Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, in Luke chapter 2, I'm going to suggest that the Cataluma there on the first night of Jesus' life was a guest room of a house in Bethlehem. Interesting that the Catalumas sandwich the story of Jesus' life and ministry. No room in the first one, and he was in charge in the second one.
That's fantastic. A very interesting little literary device used by Luke, the physician, in writing his gospel. Now, Gary, so the question would come for the person who's archaeologically minded. Okay, first century houses, is what you're describing, can that be correlated with any archaeological evidence?
Well, yes, absolutely. And Israelite houses, Judean houses, had upstairs rooms frequently, and clearly the text suggests one of the terms that was used it's Cataluma, guest room. And so if we've got it right, Joseph goes to his ancestral home in Bethlehem. Now, the stories about, them turning him away, I don't think that the text warrants that. He's the son of the King David, and he's coming back, a great grandson, but nonetheless in the line of the kings. And so he comes back to Bethlehem. I don't think he's going to be turned away from his ancestral home. So he's invited in, but the room is already filled, aunts, uncles, cousins, whoever. And maybe Mary says to him, I don't want to climb that ladder or the stairs, depending. And there's too many people up there. Joe, let's just stay down here. I'll be fine. By the way, just clean out that stable over there and we'll do okay.
So what I hear you saying, and we're going to put pictures up of this, is that we have found in first century homes that people lived up on the second floor. That's where they slept and rested. And the first floor was actually where they kept their animals. They did not keep them in a separate building, like a barn, like we usually think of in the modern day.
Certainly there could be a barn. In fact, in Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity, there's a cave. So there are other ways, but it was basically the manger, the barn was on the ground floor of the house, and they had the kitchen and storage there. And then either they had a wide house, a big house, and they could have other rooms on that ground floor, but regularly, they would build a second floor and even a third, and that would be like in Jerusalem, like in Bethlehem. It's very possible, very likely.
Yeah, so when there was said there was no room at the inn, we've inferred in the Christmas story, hey, I'm the innkeeper, sorry, no vacancy, you have to go somewhere else. But once we understand that Cataluma is an upper room, and we understand that the other family members have come back to their ancestral home for the census, it changes the picture of what's happening. So that's really fascinating. Now, in the archaeology, they've also found what we would call feeding troughs. You mentioned that, or we translate as a manger.
Mangers.
Manger. Talk about that a little bit, Gary.
Photnes in Greek. We have a graphic up on the screen now, and it shows an ancient Israelite house, and you get the sense of how people live. So on the ground floor, you've got people working in the real living room of the house, the kitchen, and they're working with food and other domestic activities. And then on the left-hand side, you can see on the ground floor animals, and there's a manger, a feeding trough in front of a couple of them. Now, they wouldn't have had a whole flock of sheep or goats in the house, but they would have had a couple, and they would have had a manger there to feed them. And then you notice people living on the second floor of this house. A wider house, you could have people living on the first floor, but to get away from noise and sounds and stuff, the second floor was a great place for people to live. That's where the guest room was, I'm suggesting, and the manger was on the ground floor of the very same house.
Excellent. So now we're painting a little bit of a picture of the night of the birth. Another thing that just occurred to me, and you've talked about this before, is, the angels appear to the shepherds in the field. Now, in our nativity scenes, the angels are there, but in the biblical text, they're in the field. So take about you got about a minute or so left of this segment, Gary. Go ahead and talk about that a little bit. It's very interesting.
Yeah, our whole manger scene is extended over when the wise guys show up, then we're even talking later. So Jesus was born laid in the manger, and they're I'm suggesting the ancestral home of King David, Joseph's family. And so Jesus was there in the midst of the family. Sometime that night, angels told shepherds, you got to see what's going on in Bethlehem. And they showed up sometime that night. And whether they thought to go to that particular house, maybe they did, the ancestral home of King David, it made sense to them to start there, or whatever, we don't know. But they got there sometime during that night.
Yeah, that's great. Well, friends, we just want to say that Gary and I are walking through this because I think the lesson here is we want to pay close attention to the biblical text. We are certainly not trying to poo-poo the Christmas story. It's wonderful, it's awesome, and we celebrate it each year. But it is a little bit of a lesson in being careful of the biblical text. We're going to talk about that in our next segment, and then we're going to have some application. Gary has some really cool and interesting application of all this for us as we reflect on the Christmas story. And with that thought, we'll be right back, folks.
Bible in Spade is a non-technical quarterly publication published by the Associates for Biblical Research. Written from a scholarly and conservative viewpoint, Bible in Spade supports the inerrancy of the biblical record and is a must-read for both the serious Bible student and anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Archaeological evidence, properly interpreted, upholding the history of the Bible. Subscribe today at BibleArchaeology.org.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm your host, Henry Smith. I'm here with archaeologist Gary Byers. We're talking about the Christmas story. How well do you know it? Well, Gary, we picked up a little bit there at the end. We were talking about the angels, and they're out in the fields in the biblical narrative, and we put them at the manger in the barn with the animals and all that. So let's just talk about one more piece of that before we move to some really interesting application, and that is the Magi. Let's talk about them.
Okay, the Magi is the Greek New Testament word. We translate it in English, the wise men. And we always have three of them showing up at the house, at the manger scene, usually at church when we do the nativity scene. The shepherds show up, and then the wise men come in from the other side. The Bible doesn't say how many Magi there were. In fact, if they're traveling from some distance, you would imagine it'd be a caravan full, not just three. Probably the three come from the three gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But and it does say in there that they come to the house. And so some have said, well, that because they've left the manger in the barn, but that I think is still in the same house. But they probably came a year to a year and a half later, because when they stop in Jerusalem, King Herod says, go to Bethlehem. Herod had no idea what they were talking about. He called the wise men, and they checked the scriptures and said, go to Bethlehem. And it's 4 miles away to the south of Jerusalem. Not a long trip after wherever they came from. And so they head there, and he said, bring me back a message so I can worship him too. And of course, that wasn't King Herod's plan. And the wise men did not go back. So when Herod heard about it, he said, kill all the male babies in Bethlehem area from 2 years of age on down. So he must have used the year 2, the age 2, because it's been some time since the birth, based on the star and what the wise men saw. So he was adding maybe an extra year. Maybe Jesus was a year old. He said, well, let's go 2 just to be sure, maybe 18 months. But it would have been some time later, I think, for certain, when you take a careful look at the biblical text and nothing else.
Yeah, it's really really fascinating as we unpack the story. So what is part of the lesson here, Gary? We're having a little bit of fun with this. We want to stay true to the biblical text. We have archaeology that helps us. We know about censuses that occurred in the ancient world and all that. So let's bridge the gap to the application. The first part you want to talk about was letting the Bible speak to us. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's if my reconstruction of the Christmas story is right, and by the way, I didn't come up with this. I read it first, made me mad, and then I've been thinking to it and adding a few thoughts to it. But I think from when you look at the text carefully, and of course knowing the original language helps, but you look at the text carefully, I think this is a correct understanding of the story. Jesus was born in the ancestral home of Joseph, which was the ancestral home of King David in the city of David, Bethlehem. So if that is true, Jesus was born in the midst of a family situation. And so I think it's really important for us to let the Bible speak to us and look at what it says, not what we always thought it said or heard that it said. And how many times have any of us read a passage and looked at it for what it actually says and go, wow, that's not the way I remember it. That's not the way I was taught. Boy, this is not the way I've always thought this passage says. So I think we should look at the Bible. And when we read the Bible, three things. First, what does the verse actually say? What do those words actually say? Then, what do I think that actually means? So what it says is this. What does that really mean then? And then number three, and I think this is essential with all Bible study, whatever we're doing, how does this apply to my life? Reading the Bible without applying it to our lives, we are missing the best part. But to apply it properly, we actually have to understand what it says and what it really means.
Yeah, that's right. Because if we have misapplication from misunderstanding, we can end up, making errors or living in some legalistic way, or defending something that the Bible doesn't say from an apologetic standpoint. So getting it right is really important. Now, let's shift to, you've been talking about ancestral home, lineage of David, Joseph's family. Well, that echoes of what we do at Christmas time every year. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because that's really important.
Well, see, and I think for me, this is such a key part of the Christmas story. Family is important to God. Always has been, always will be. We're referred to as brothers and sisters. He is our heavenly Father. Family is at the very heart of who God is and how he interacts with us. And so if my reconstruction of the Christmas story is right, then Jesus was surrounded by family at his birth, or at the first Christmas, if you would. And so God made sure that his son was surrounded by loving, caring family. To me, that sounds just like God, and it makes total sense. And I think it fits the house and family of David, which Joseph came from. So if God wanted Jesus to be surrounded by family at Christmas and in his life, then I'm sure he wants us to have family and be surrounded by family too. But in my old days, I spent over 20 years as the deputy director at Helping Up Mission in downtown Baltimore, working with guys who were drug addicts and alcoholics and had struggled with life terribly. And when they got their lives together, a lot of them didn't have any family to go back to, or the family that they had was not healthy for their new spiritual walk. And so sometimes we don't have biological family available to us. But guess what? God provides us a spiritual family.
Yeah.
And so whether you have biological family or spiritual family, you need to stay connected anytime, but especially at Christmas.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to end the show, Gary, a reminder of people to, see your family at Christmas time. And we'll be airing this during the Christmas season. We wish everyone a very Merry Christmas as they consider the entrance of Jesus into the world and his birth. Gary, thank you for being with us. We're so grateful for the work that you do.
Thank you, bro.
And friends, I just want to encourage you at this Christmas season to think about the narrative surrounding the birth of Jesus. And of course, we've gone through it today to be sure we have it accurate, but the larger point is what God has done by sending his Son into the world to give his life for us, to live for us, to die for us, to suffer for us, and to be resurrected on our behalf. We only wait for him to return for the glorious day of his coming as a conquering king. We thank you for joining us today for Digging for Truth.